Can you take her instead of me? The little girl's voice was barely a whisper. The rancher said nothing. Then he took both. Texas, 1870. A border livestock market simmering under a sun that baked the dust into a fine grit, catching in the back of the throat with every breath. Wooden pens groaned with the weight of cattle and hogs. Farther out, in the market's shadowed fringe, were the people. They were women, mostly immigrants, their wrists and ankles bound. Some were too weak to sit upright, their ragged dresses hanging from their frames, their faces hollowed by heat and hunger. No one bid on them, not anymore. Those left too long in the slave pens were deemed unsellable, the kind the traffickers would clear out after sundown. Ryland moved past them without slowing. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over sun-darkened hair, his face a landscape of shadow, unreadable. At 37, he was tall and hard-framed, with calloused hands and a limp in his right leg. A gift from a horse that hadn't survived the same storm that had claimed his family. He'd buried his wife 5 winters ago, and their daughter, Clara, 2 months after that. Since then, Beau lived alone, running cattle and outrunning memories. He kept his eyes forward, away from the pens. He didn't need any more reminders of how ugly the world had become. He was only here for horse medicine. But then a tug at his coat, a small hand, dirty fingers, and brown eyes far too wide for a face so small. She couldn't have been more than 4. "You don't have to take me," she whispered in broken English, her voice trembling. "Just take my mama." Beau turned. The girl stood barefoot on the dry earth, clutching the edge of his coat with a kind of reverence. Her dress was torn, her knees were bruised, and her face was sunburned beneath a tangle of black hair. She pointed a tiny finger toward the shaded side of the corral. There, slumped against a post, was a woman. Late 20s, perhaps. Her skin, once golden, was now pale with dust and fever. Her wrists were bound with old rope, rubbed raw and bleeding. Her lip was split, her jaw bruised, one eye swollen shut. She wasn't moving. "That her?" Beau asked quietly. The girl nodded. She hasn't eaten. I gave her my bread. All of it. For 2 days." Beau crouched down, his knees cracking as he met the girl's gaze. "What's her name?" he asked. "Lena," she said. "She's my mama. They said, if no one buys her today, they'll take her somewhere bet." Beau looked again at the woman, Lena, her breath so shallow it barely stirred the dust on her chest. Her hands were tied above her head, like an animal too wild to trust. He saw the swelling on her wrists, the split skin on her cheek, and he saw the girl's eyes, a mirror of a hunger he had never known how to feed in his own daughter. "Please," she whispered again. "Just take her." Beau stood. He didn't speak. He walked toward the pen where Lena lay crumpled, her head lolled to one side. A slaver sitting nearby perked up, tapping a fly swatter against his knee. "Looking to make a purchase, mister?" the man asked. Beau didn't answer. He pulled a leather pouch from his coat and tossed it onto a nearby table with a dull thud. Gold coins spilled out. "I'll take both," Beau said. The slaver's eyebrows shot up. "Both?" Beau nodded toward the child. "The girl comes too." The man leaned forward, his eyes assessing the coins. "Well now," he grunted. "You just bought yourself a whole mess of trouble, cowboy." Beau looked down at the unconscious woman, then at the girl still standing behind him. I've had worse, he said. He lifted the child gently, settling her against his hip. Her arms curled around his neck without a sound. Then, as carefully as if he were handling glass, he cut Lena's bonds and carried her out of the dust. Not a soul spoke as he passed. Not one. But somewhere in the silence, as he walked away from the pen, the little girl whispered against his collar, "My name is Rosita. Thank you for taking both." Bo didn't answer. He just held them tighter. The ride back to the ranch was long and silent. Rosita sat pressed against him on the saddle, her tiny hands clenched in his shirt. Lena lay slumped across a blanket behind them, tied down gently so she wouldn't fall. She hadn't stirred. Bo's land was tucked away beyond the hills, hidden in a fold of cottonwoods and quiet dirt. No one visited. No one passed by. That was how he liked it. Until today. He carried Lena inside, her weight as light as a sack of grain. The old cabin still smelled of wood smoke and leather, the floor worn smooth by steps that no longer walked it. He didn't hesitate. He took her to the small bedroom, the one painted pale blue, the one left untouched since Clara's death. Her wooden toys still rested on the windowsill. A pair of scuffed shoes lay beneath the bed. On the nightstand, a framed photo of a smiling, gap-toothed girl with her arms around a lamb. Bo laid Lena on the bed, his movements gentle, as if afraid the room itself might protest. He straightened her limbs, pulled the quilt over her, and then turned to the hearth. Rosita stood in the doorway, her eyes wide. "She's burning," she said softly, touching her own forehead. Bo nodded. "We'll get that down." He boiled water and brought out a tin of willow bark. He crushed it, mixed it with molasses, and coaxed Rosita to help. Together, they worked. He cleaned the cuts on Lena's wrists and wrapped them in clean cloth. Her shoulder was deeply bruised, her back mottled from the sun. He dabbed salve on her cracked lips and gently pressed a cool, damp rag against her temple. Rosita took the cloth from him then. She climbed onto the bed, knelt beside her mother, and continued wiping her forehead, just as Bo had shown her. "Mama," she whispered. "Mama, wake up, I'm here." Bo stepped back, leaning against the doorframe. He hadn't seen this room lit by candlelight in years. Now, it glowed again, filled with effort, with care, with the quiet hum of someone wanting to live. That night, Rosita slept curled at the foot of the bed. Bo dozed in a chair by the door, his boots still on, one hand resting on the rifle balanced across his lap. For 2 days, Lena didn't move. On the third morning, as Bo was changing the cloth on her wrist, he felt her flinch, just a twitch of her fingers. Then a groan. Her eyelids fluttered open. They were dark brown, sharp, and filled with fear. Bo froze. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You're safe now." Lena struggled to sit up, but a flare of pain in her side made her gasp, her hand flying to her bruised ribs. "Don't!" Bo started to step forward, but stopped when her eyes locked on his. They were feral, ready to run, even from a bed. "Where's Rosita?" she rasped, her voice dry as sand. A small bundle shot forward from the corner of the room. "Mama!" Rosita launched herself into the bed, wrapping her arms tight around Lena's neck. Lena gasped again, not from pain this time, but from a relief so deep it shook her entire body. Her arms curled around the girl, holding on as if to anchor herself to the world. Bo backed away, giving them their space. In the kitchen, he sat at the table, staring at his hands. They were nicked and dirt-stained, built for fencing and branding, not for bandages and soup ladles. But for 3 days, they had done something different. And from the other side of the wall, he heard it. A mother's sob, and then a daughter's quiet giggle. Two sounds he hadn't heard in years, and though he would never say it aloud, something old and broken inside him shifted. Not healed, not yet, but stirring. The scream shattered the morning quiet. Bo dropped the bucket of feed and sprinted toward the house, his heart pounding like a war drum. He hit the porch as the front door slammed open, left hanging ajar like a fresh wound. Inside was chaos. Lena stood in the bedroom, wild and panting, her hair a tangle across her face. She clutched a wooden hairbrush like a weapon, raised high and trembling. "Stay away," she shouted, her voice thick with raw fear. "I swear to God, if you come near me." Bo froze in the doorway. He raised his hands slowly, palms open. "It's all right," he said gently. "You're safe." But Lena didn't seem to hear him. Her whole body trembled with a storm that had lived in her bones for too long. She lunged. The brush cracked against his shoulder, again and again. Each strike wasn't meant to hurt him. It was meant to stop her from being helpless anymore. "You bought me!" she cried, her voice splintering. "You think that gives you rights? That I'm yours now? Just another thing on your land?" Bo didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself. When her breath finally hitched and her arm dropped with exhaustion, he met her gaze and said one word. "No." Then he turned and walked out. Lena collapsed to her knees, clutching the brush, her shoulders shaking with sobs. From behind the door, a small shadow stirred. Rosita stepped into the room barefoot. She walked carefully to her mother, knelt beside her, and touched her arm with a gentleness that didn't belong to someone so young. "He sleeps on the floor," Rosita whispered. "He never touches." Lena blinked. "What?" "He makes soup," she continued, "and he brushes my hair. But he sleeps on the floor every night, by the door. I see him." Lena turned her head. For the first time, she noticed the folded blanket and pillow tucked near the doorframe, half hidden. Bo had never once entered the room without knocking. She had thought it was because he didn't care. Now, she realized it was because he did. Her gaze drifted to the small table by the lamp. A framed photograph sat there, faded by time. A little girl with missing front teeth held a lamb, beaming like the sun. Next to it was a blanket, embroidered at the edge in green thread. Clara. That night, when Bo brought a tray of food, Lena didn't speak, but she nodded. He didn't linger. He just nodded back and closed the door gently behind him. Later, as Rosita whispered stories about horses and skies, she said, "Mr. Bo talks funny, but he sings to the fence when he's alone." A sound escaped Lena's lips, soft and real. A laugh. The first sound of warmth from her in days. When she turned off the lamp that night, she didn't lock the door. She didn't feel like she had to. The next morning, light spilled across the windowsill. Lena stood in silence watching Bo mend the eastern fence. His sleeves were rolled, his hands rough and steady. He didn't glance toward the house. There was no hunger in his gaze, no claim in his stance. He was just a man who had said he would help, and kept doing it. And for the first time in years, Lena felt something unexpected move through her. A question. A beginning. Maybe, just maybe, not all men came to take. The sun hung high, burning over the hills when they came. 3 riders, with dust kicking behind their horses like chasing ghosts. The man at the front, tall and dressed in a leather duster, dismounted first. He and his two companions struck the ground with heavy, sure steps, as if they owned the very dirt. Bo saw them long before they reached the fence line. He walked out of the barn, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. The tall one smirked. "Name's Doyle. We're here on business." He held up a stained piece of paper. "Come to collect merchandise. Girl named Lena, property of a Mr. Mercado. Got the papers right here." Bo glanced at the crude forgery. "I bought her," he said flatly. "No," Doyle said, stepping closer. "You bought time. She belongs to us. Now we ain't here to stir trouble. Just hand her over." Bo's eyes flicked toward the porch, where a curtain barely shifted. Lena was watching, Rosita clinging to her skirts. He turned back. "Get off my land." The second man sneered. "Or what?" Bo took another step forward, his hand empty, but his body a loaded gun. "I paid gold for her," he said, his voice low. "Now I'll pay blood if I must." Doyle laughed. "You must think you're some kind of hero." In one swift motion, the man behind Doyle reached for his rifle. But Bo moved faster. He spun, pulled a lever hidden behind the fence post, and a shotgun dropped into his hands from a hollowed-out rail. The blast tore through the air. The second man went down, screaming. Doyle drew and fired. The bullet tore across Bo's upper arm, and blood bloomed against his shirt. He staggered back, dropped to one knee, cocked the shotgun again, and fired at their feet. Doyle cursed, ducking behind his horse. "Next one takes your head off," Bo growled. That was all it took. They scrambled onto their horses, dragged their wounded man across the saddle, and fled into the horizon. Bo stayed on one knee for a long moment, blood dripping from his sleeve. Then the front door burst open. Lena rushed to him, her skirts trailing in the dust, and dropped to the ground with a gasp. Her hands shook as she pressed them to his arm, tearing the bloody shirt away. "You're bleeding," she whispered. He grunted. "Not too bad." "You're a fool," she said, tears streaking her cheeks. "You could have been killed." "I've been dead before," he said softly, "when I lost my daughter. But today I'm alive." She froze. Then, without a word, she pressed a clean cloth to the wound and wrapped his arm as best she could. Bo winced. "That stings. You deserve worse," she said, but her voice trembled. He looked up at her. "You didn't have to come out here." "I did," she replied, meeting his eyes. "Because you didn't have to fight for me. But you did." Inside, Rosita clung to the doorway, watching as her mother knelt in the dust beside the man who had shed blood for her. And for the first time, Lena's hands didn't shake when she touched him. The kitchen smelled faintly of blood and boiled cloth. Bo sat shirtless at the table, his right arm resting on a folded towel. The bullet had passed clean through, but the flesh around the entry wound was swollen and red. His jaw was a tight line carved in stone. Sweat clung to his brow, but he made no sound. Lena stood beside him with a kitchen knife in one hand and a half-empty bottle of whiskey in the other. Her fingers trembled slightly as she poured the liquor onto a strip of cloth and then directly over the wound. The sharp hiss made Bo grunt, but he didn't flinch. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, his voice quiet, his eyes clouded with pain. Lena nodded. "I've seen worse." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I need to cut a little, to clean it out." Bo looked from the knife to her face. His eyes held no fear, only trust. You don't have to. I want to, she said. Their eyes met, and for the first time, neither looked away. She tore a strip of linen, rolled it tight, and pressed it between his teeth. Bite, she instructed softly. He obeyed. Her hands hovered for a moment, then she lowered the blade. The edge kissed his flesh. Bo's whole body tensed, a groan rumbling in his throat, muffled by the cloth. But he stayed still. Lena's hands moved quickly, her palms slick with sweat, but her motions were precise. She cut away the damaged tissue, dabbed with whiskey-soaked cloth, and pressed clean gauze against the exit wound. When it was over, she wrapped the arm with firm, practiced knots, her breath coming in short gasps. Bo leaned back in the chair, eyes shut, his chest glistening. He spat the cloth into a basin and exhaled slowly. You've done that before, he murmured. Lena was wiping her hands. I had a brother, she said, her voice distant. Back in Sonora, he broke things, mostly bones. I used to patch him up. Bo opened his eyes. The silence that fell between them was different this time. It was not cold, not tense. It was just quiet. Lena's gaze drifted to the mantel, drawn again to the photograph she had noticed before. A little girl with soft curls cradled a lamb in her lap. She looked like Rosita, she murmured. Bo nodded. Her name was June. What happened? Fever, he replied, his voice low and simple. Took her in 3 days. Lena's expression softened with a shared sorrow. And your wife? She was gone a month later, he said. Couldn't live in a house that didn't have her daughter's voice in it. Lena swallowed hard. Her eyes fell to the table, to the empty space that lay between them. Slowly, her hand came to rest there, palm open, not reaching, just waiting. She was lucky, she said softly. Bo frowned slightly. How do you mean? To be loved like that? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, with deliberate care, Bo reached across the space and placed his hand over hers. His fingers were rough, calloused from a life of hard work. Hers were thinner, worn from labor and from chains. But they fit. She didn't pull away. Instead, she met his eyes, and for the first time since the cage, since the auction block, Lena didn't feel the weight of a man's gaze as a thing to be feared. She felt it as something soft, something human, something she wanted to turn. You should rest, she whispered, her thumb brushing over his knuckles. But she didn't move, and neither did he. They just sat there, two scarred souls, battered by the world, now stitched together not by duty, but by choice, by something far stronger than survival, by the fragile beginning of trust. The late afternoon sun stretched golden fingers across the Texas plains, painting the grass in hues of honey and rust. Bo walked beside the small, spotted mare as Rosita bounced in the saddle, her little legs barely reaching the stirrups he had adjusted just for her. The horse moved with a slow, gentle rhythm, her hooves making soft thuds in the dry dirt. Easy now, Bo said. Keep your hands steady. Rosita giggled, her small fingers gripping the reins, as if it were the most important job in the world. Like this? Just like that, Bo nodded, one hand resting lightly on the mare's side, the other ready to catch Rosita if she slipped. You're doing better than most grown folks. Rosita's face lit up with pride. Her cheeks flushed from the wind, her hair escaping in soft wisps around her temples. She looked down at him, her smile wide, and then fell quiet. Something in her gaze shifted. She leaned forward, wrapping her arms around Beau's neck. He caught her reflexively, lifting her from the saddle. She nestled into his chest, small hands curling into the fabric of his shirt. Then she whispered, "Can I call you Papa now?" Beau's breath caught in his throat. He froze, his arms tightening around her. The world seemed to fall silent. The breeze paused its journey across the plains. The grass held still. Even the mare turned her head, as if waiting for his answer. But Beau said nothing. His throat burned, and his chest ached in a deep, forgotten corner he thought had long gone numb. So he just held her. He held her as if the question needed no words. Held her as if the answer had always been yes. From the edge of the fence line, Lena watched. She had come out with a basket of fresh apples, ready to call them in for supper. But she stopped when she saw Beau lifting Rosita from the horse. The girl's small arms looped around his neck. Then she heard it, carried on the wind. Her daughter's voice, small and filled with a universe of hope. "Can I call you Papa now?" Lena stopped breathing, and when she saw Beau's silence, saw the way he simply held Rosita, his face buried in her wild curls, Lena felt something shift deep inside her. Something broke, and in the same instant, something began to heal. The apples tumbled from her hands, forgotten in the tall grass. She sank to the ground, her knees folding beneath her, her palms pressing into the warm dirt. Tears welled, hot and quiet, streaming down her cheeks. She cried for all the nights Rosita had slept in fear, for all the mornings she had woken without a sense of safety, for the long, lonely months Lena had believed no man could ever be trusted again. And now, here was this man, worn, weathered, and silent, carrying her daughter as if she were made of glass and gold. A sound that was both a laugh and a sob escaped her lips, and the tears fell harder. That night, long after Rosita had fallen asleep, curled in the new quilt Beau had brought from town, Lena stood in the doorway of his room. He sat by the window, a lantern casting flickering shadows across his face, the bandage on his shoulder freshly changed. She stepped inside without knocking. Her voice was a soft whisper in the quiet. "She asked to call you Papa." Beau turned slowly. He looked tired, but it wasn't the weariness of pain. "She did," he said. "I heard." Lena nodded. A silence grew between them, but it was not the hard, guarded silence they had once used to survive. This was gentle and full of unspoken words. "She never called anyone that before," Lena whispered. Beau nodded again, his hand resting on the arm of his chair. "I didn't know what to say." "You didn't need to," she said, her voice catching. She moved closer, kneeling beside his chair. Her hand found his. "You brought her back to life," she said. Her eyes met his. "And me too." He did not speak. He just lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her fingertips, as if they were something sacred. The sun hung low over the Texas horizon, warm and golden, stretching long shadows over the field of bluebonnets Beau had planted years ago. He'd done it for no reason he could name, until now. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of spring and the promise of something new. At the edge of the field, by the old forge, Beau stood with his sleeves rolled up, his eyes steady on the small brass ring cooling in his palm. He had made it from the firing pin of the revolver that had saved Lena's life. It was rough, imperfect, but it was honest and strong, just like the woman he'd made it for. When he walked back to the cabin, Lena was outside, brushing Rosita's hair. Her simple white dress, its sleeves slightly uneven, and its hem hand-stitched with more effort than elegance, fluttered in the breeze. And yet, it suited her more than any silk ever could. She turned as he approached, and for a moment, her breath caught. Bo came to her slowly. There was no crowd, no preacher, not yet. Just the three of them, standing together in a world they had somehow managed to survive. He didn't kneel, his words were few. He just held out the ring in his calloused hand. His voice was low and steady. I lost everything I ever had. He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. But you and Rosita, you gave me something to live for. Lena's hand trembled as she took the ring. Her fingers brushed against his. She looked down at the brass, then at her wrist, where the faint scar from a rope still marked her skin. Then she looked up into his eyes and nodded. Yes. By late afternoon, the field was dressed in petals. Bo had asked nothing of the town, but Miss Alberta, the old seamstress, had come anyway with a bouquet of wildflowers and 2 dresses, one for the bride, one for the flower girl. A few neighbors stood at a respectful distance. Even the sheriff was there, tipping his hat once before deciding that Bo's eyes said everything that needed to be said. Rosita skipped ahead, scattering petals from a basket nearly as big as she was. Her curls bounced, and her pure joy filled the air like music. Lena followed her daughter, holding a bouquet of prairie blossoms tied with simple twine. Her dress caught the sunlight. Her eyes were bright, her hands steady. The scar on her wrist was visible, as was the one on her collarbone, but she made no effort to hide them. For there is no shame in survival, and she was walking, breathing proof of it. At the altar, nothing more than 2 crates covered with a linen sheet. Bo waited. He was cleaned up in a buttoned shirt, the collar still stiff, his hair combed for the first time in weeks. But it was his eyes that were different, softer, lit from within. When Lena reached him, she whispered, I never dreamed I'd wear white again. Bo simply shook his head. You earned it, he said. The preacher spoke his words, and Bo and Lena spoke theirs. The kiss was simple, sweet, and slow, a quiet mending of 2 broken things, finally made whole. When they turned to walk back down the petal-strewn path, Rosita ran to them, grabbing both their hands. Now we're all 3, she declared, her face beaming. Bo looked at Lena, and Lena, her head held high and her heart full, smiled through her tears. Yes, mi amor, she said. All 3. The days that followed were slow, quiet, and full of breath. Lena started her mornings in the kitchen. She burned the eggs twice that first week, but Bo ate every last bite without a word of complaint. Rosita helped mash beans, her small hands stirring with immense pride. In the evenings, they sat on the porch. Bo would clean his rifle while Lena stitched dresses from leftover fabric. Rosita drew on scraps of paper, pictures of the 3 of them holding hands, smiling under a big yellow sun. She pinned each new drawing to the wall beside the hearth. One night, as the fire crackled low, Lena whispered in broken English, We are family. Bo looked at her, his expression certain. He nodded. We are. They found their rhythm. Bo taught Rosita how to saddle a pony. Lena's voice grew stronger, mixing Spanish and English until the words found their place. She made pozole from memory one Sunday and smiled when Bo asked for a second bowl. At church, she sat beside him, her scarred wrist no longer hidden by long sleeves. No one dared whisper anymore. Not after what Beau had done to protect her. Not after the wedding beneath the wildflowers. Rosita sat proudly between them, coloring quietly through the sermon. One afternoon, Lena opened a dusty trunk in the loft and found an old dress of Beau's daughter's, yellowed and soft with time. She pressed it to her chest and wept for the little girl she never knew. That evening, she gave it to Rosita, who twirled in the fading light. Beau watched them from the porch, his hands folded, his eyes glassy. "You okay?" Lena asked softly, coming to stand beside him. He nodded slowly. "I think for the first time in a long while, yes." At night, Rosita would often crawl into their bed, tucking herself between them to whisper, "I love you, Mama. I love you, Papa." And every time Lena's eyes would blur. Not from pain, but from the kind of joy that stings when you've lived too long without it. That fall, they built a new fence, painted the barn, and repaired a broken swing. Beau carved a wooden plaque for the porch. La Casa de Esperanza, the House of Hope. Lena kissed him right after he nailed it up. One crisp morning, as the first frost kissed the fields, Lena stood at the edge of their land and whispered a prayer to the wind in Spanish. A prayer of gratitude, a goodbye to fear and a welcome to whatever came next. Beau came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "You still scared?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not anymore." Inside the house, on the wall above the hearth, hung Rosita's latest drawing, a family of 3, with big red hearts drawn over their chests. And beneath it, Lena had written in careful script a single word. Home. I was trampled, branded, sold like cattle, and forgotten like dust. But he saw more. The little girl who begged him to save me, she gave me life. And the man who stood quiet when others shouted, he gave me a future. Now I see it too. I am not owned. I am not broken. I am loved. I am home. If this story made your heart ache and heal, if you felt the silent strength of Beau Ryland, the fierce love of little Rosita, and the quiet rebirth of Lena, then you are exactly why we tell these stories. At Wild West Love Stories, we believe in romance forged through fire, in families built not by blood, but by choice. Here, in the dusty corners of the American frontier, love always finds a way. Subscribe now to never miss a tale of redemption, resilience, and the kind of love that rides through storms and stays for the sunrise. Because real love doesn't always come with flowers. It comes with grit, grace, and someone willing to stand beside you, no matter what. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories, where the dust settles, but hearts never do.